Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Morgan and I am an academic. The best notes that I ever take in school have three specific qualities. They are 1, atomic, 2, deeply interconnected, and 3, they're written in my own words. So what do I mean by those things, and how can you take the most effective notes as possible, whether you are learning something new or researching and trying to come up with new knowledge? In this video, I'm going to tell you about those 3 qualities of really excellent notes, and even better, I'm going to show you examples from my own note vault. I use the Zettelkasten method for note-taking, and I use that in a software called Obsidian predominantly. I have lots of videos on both of those things if you want to learn more. This video was inspired by a comment from Mexico4868 here on YouTube on one of my previous videos, so thank you so much for this idea. And this video is sponsored by Skillshare, so more on them a little bit later. Let's start with the first quality of really great notes. They are atomic. This means that they cannot be reduced. Each note captures a single whole thought or idea, and this is very different from how I took notes during school. During school, I would sit down in my seat at lecture and I would take notes on everything the lecturer was saying that I could remember and that I found interesting, and they would all live in a single notebook or binder, and that meant that each note was like 3 pages long because it was just everything I was capturing during that lecture, and after lecture, I wouldn't do anything with those notes. They would just live in that binder or whatever, and then I might reread them later in the year when I had to take an exam or write a paper. But later in the year when I went to study for that exam, it was really hard to find the ideas that I had during the course because they were all intermingled with each other, and what's more, they were organized based on how the professor thought they should be organized, not how they were fitting into my brain. So because I took these notes linearly and in the order the professor thought they should go, it's really hard for me to move those notes around and put them into new contexts that are not the specific course that I learned the idea in. So because those notes are contextually dependent on the lecture in which I took them, it's really hard for me to access them today. So what I do now is I still take notes however makes most sense for me during the lecture, but then I go through and ask myself, what are the distinct ideas that I can break these notes down into? And then I separate out those ideas into what I call atomic notes, and people that practice the Zettelkasten method call atomic notes. And this makes all of these ideas so much easier to access because they're not dependent on specific other ideas. They're modular. They can be pulled into whatever project I'm working on at any given time. So let me give you an example of one that I have found particularly useful over the past little while. This is a note called Academic Humility, and if you're wondering why I put dashes in between the words of my notes, I have a whole video on that topic that you can check out after this one. And this note says, academic humility is an idea that comes from Umberto Eco in How to Write a Thesis. It is that we must humble ourselves to accepting any potential source of knowledge in our academic research, because we can learn something from everyone and everything. Therefore, Eco says, if I wanted to do research, as a matter of principle, I should not exclude any source. So this note encapsulates one single idea, which is the idea of academic humility and what that is, which I got from one particular text, Umberto Eco's How to Write a Thesis. And this is a note I come back to again and again because it is so simple and concise. This is like an idea that I want to pull into lots of different projects that I'm working on in many different contexts. So what makes this note atomic and particularly useful for me? I get asked a lot how I know if a note is atomic, how I know if a note is small enough, reduced enough, how I know if it's a single thought or idea. And I think that there are 4 good indicators, although there's no right answer. Ultimately, it's your system, and a thought for you is going to be different than a thought for me. But here are the 4 indicators that I've come up with for myself. First of all, a note could probably be reduced further if it's really hard to name the note. I name all of my notes after the core idea that they express. If it's hard to boil down that note into just a few words so that you can name it really concisely, then it might be more than one idea. Second, a note might not be atomic if it's hard to understand it at a glance. So at a glance, an atomic note should tell you what it's about. If you're spending time trying to parse out what the goal of this note is, then it might be a couple ideas that are being misconstrued as a single idea. Third, a note might not be atomic if it's really long. Now, some ideas do require a lot of length in order to express this single idea, but more often than not, a single idea can often be expressed in quite few words. And if it's too wordy, if it's too long, that probably means you can break it down a little further and take some of those words and turn them into another note and just link them in this note instead of saying it all. For instance, if in this note you offer any examples of what the idea is, you might want to turn those examples into a note of their own and take them out of this main note, because examples, case studies, might be able to be used in multiple different contexts alongside multiple different ideas. So you want them, again, to be modular so that you can discuss them in many places. And fourthly, I know a note is atomic if when I go through that note actively searching for ways to reduce it, I can't. So if I can find ways to reduce it, obviously I should, and it's not atomic yet, I need to keep breaking it down. For instance, this note on academic humility used to include the example of how Zettelkasten does this well. But when I went looking for things to cut, it was just as easy to turn that into its own note. And if this example of the Zettelkasten was only listed in the body of this parent note about academic humility, I wouldn't be able to find that information when I need it for an entirely different project. So that's why it's so important for me to make my notes atomic. People are always wondering how I find my ideas when I have like 1,000 notes that are all just seemingly cluttered. They're just organized alphabetically. It's because my ideas are atomic, and so everything I need to find has a name and is linked with other things. And then also, in this note on academic humility, it would be tempting to discuss the idea that academic knowledge can come from any source inside the note on academic humility, because that is what academic humility means. But as you can see from my note on this topic, I didn't even reference Eco in it. So clearly, even though academic humility never comes without the idea that academic knowledge can come from any source, this idea that academic knowledge can come from any source is sometimes found outside of conversations about academic humility. So I want to make sure it has its own place. Something I want to mention here in order to exercise some academic humility myself is that not everybody learns the best through the written language. In fact, I've seen some people create Zettelkasten notes or these atomic notes using sketchnoting and visual note-taking, where they literally draw out the idea on a small note card so that it's a single idea, but it's an image instead of text, because different people's brains work differently. And if that's the case for you, if your brain works differently than mine and you're looking for some more inspiration for how to take notes better, I highly recommend this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes, including some on sketchnoting like this one from Ink Factory Studio. Skillshare takes a learn-by-doing approach to teaching, where each member can create and share a project after completing a class. For instance, here is the visual note I took for the academic humility note that I just shared with you. Skillshare also offers career-focused classes in freelancing, entrepreneurship, marketing, social media, UI and UX, productivity, and so much more. So whether you're looking for the next thing to learn or learning how to learn, Skillshare has you covered. If you'd like to try Skillshare out and understand all the hype, the first 500 people to use my link will get access to one of Skillshare's best offers, which is 30 days free and 40% off your first year of Skillshare membership. So if you've always wondered about Skillshare, then use my link and try it for 30 days, completely free. And when you do, remember to take notes on what you learned. Now let's move on to the second thing that all my best notes have in common, and that is that they are deeply interconnected. The more dense the connections to a note, the more useful that note is going to be to you. And the best note-taking softwares have the opportunity to link between notes in two ways. First of all, links, where while you're taking the note, you are linking to other notes, and backlinks, which is those other notes have a backlink to the note that you linked them to. That way, you can see everything going on within your notes, both directly and indirectly. And then if you're using a software like Obsidian, like I do, then you can see all the connections around the note that you're in a graph view. If we think back to my school notes from the first example, they were only connected to each other through this one physical notebook in the context of one university class. So all of the connections made were within that class and other things talked about in that class. So all of the history class notes were with the history class notes, and all of the theater class notes were with the theater class notes. But what happens when all of a sudden I am interested in theater history? Now I have to go and relearn a lot of stuff in a new context because at the time I didn't build those connections into my knowledge. And the great thing about making atomic notes is that you can connect those ideas across fields because most knowledge is interdisciplinary. And the more diverse connections you make to other knowledge that you have, the more deeply you are going to learn and remember this information, which is going to make it easier to use in creative and productive ways when you're doing research or whatever it is. So now, whenever I take a note on theater, I connect it to any relevant notes on history. Let me show you an example. This is a note called "Care in Academia Means Allowing Space to be Touched." And it's got 3 little paragraphs, each doing something different. So the first paragraph says, traditional scientific academic research is based on observation, aka sight. So we observe something, that's a visual thing. But sight as a metaphor for knowing suggests separation of self from object of knowledge. And that is a note within my system. That's how specific the ideas get. Instead, Puig de la Bellacasa, Maria, 2017, so I've actually linked the source where this idea originally came from, suggests that, and we've got another note here, touch may be a better metaphor than sight for knowing. So I haven't made the note yet. This is all just preamble that is contextualizing the note. So it's other stuff that's in my system that is getting me ready to read this note. And this is going to be really useful. For instance, I've linked academic research, and that note is full of backlinks to many things that have to do with academic research. So if I'm having trouble finding care in academia means allowing space to be touched, I know that has something to do with academia. I can just go to my note on academic research and search through the backlinks to see if I can refresh my memory about this note that I took. Okay, let's move on to the second paragraph now. I've written, to use touch as a metaphor, if something is touching, it means that we feel something towards it. So to be touched doesn't necessarily mean physically touched, but also emotionally touched. It means that we don't create an emotional distance between ourselves and our research objects. So there's the idea itself about allowing space to be touched. And then I've written, this is important because, and I've just listed reasons why this is important based on notes that are already in my system. Knowledge is situated, knowledge changes the knower, academic knowledge can come from any source, even emotions, and measurement must be included in reality, and emotions are a part of our measurement. So now I've linked all the ideas that are connected to this idea, all the reasons why this idea is an important one within my system. And then I've actually offered a quote from the book that I found this idea in. So now whenever I'm in any of those notes that have been linked to, I can see this note in their backlinks and find it again. You can do this in Obsidian, the software I use, but you can also just do it with a simple paper and pen, and I have a ton of videos about how to do that as well. And my connection building within notes is never over. I would call this note a permanent note because it is a solid idea that's not going to change, and the idea itself is probably not going to grow. However, the connections will grow. So as I develop a larger and larger notes library, I might come back to this note and add in some more connections, some more examples, some more reasons why this thought is important. And of course, the backlinks are going to be growing as well. Also, you'll see that I like to make my connections to other notes directly in the text so that I have this like seamless flow of information. But if I can't find a way to link a note within the text itself, then I will add a line at the bottom and just like list all the other things that are relevant with commas in between. And the final thing that all of my best notes consist of are my own words and my own ideas. When you're reading a book or watching a documentary or having a conversation with your friend, it's so easy to just sort of copy and paste verbatim what was said without adding anything to that or re-articulating it in your own words. But to really learn that information you just tried to consume, and definitely if you want to use it later, we need to know why we saved that quote and how it connects to our other knowledge. We also need to be able to describe the idea in our own words, because if we can't describe it in our own words, it probably means we don't really know that information. If you don't at some point turn the ideas you've found into your own words or even your own ideas, then you're never going to be able to produce something from the ideas that you've discovered from other sources. So you either need to find your own words or your own ideas, and that's going to require some thinking. And for me, thinking usually requires some writing. And writing or drawing or audio recording or whatever is also going to be how you document that idea that you've had or you've articulated so that you can find it later. And I'm not saying that you should never use quotes in your notes, as you've already seen. I use quotes all the time. In fact, I think that's a really good practice to actually document somebody's words exactly so that you can cite them accurately later if you're drawing from their ideas. But every time you do include a quote, you should also re-articulate it in your own words as well. I also highly recommend articulating why you saved that particular quote. And if you can, extending from that quote or idea into a new idea that you're now having because of it. Obviously, not everyone needs to do this. I'm an academic, so my whole reason for being is creating new knowledge, original thought from the stuff that I'm finding. But for you, it might just be good enough to re-articulate that thought in your own words. So I have two examples for you, one with a quote in it and one without. Let's take a quick look at the one with a quote first. In this, it's not immediately obvious where the quote is, but if you look about halfway down, I've written, as Rideout Nicholas, 2006 Stage Fright writes, and then I give you the quote. But everything before that point was me explaining what that quote means and why it's important to other things in my Zettelkasten. And then afterwards, again, I summarize what that quote means to me. In fact, I say juggling isn't theater's failure, but rather theater itself. And juggling is not something that Nicholas Rideout talked about in this book. That's something that I'm specifically interested in, so I've extended from what he's talking about into my own domains of knowledge. And then my other example is called The Audience Should Never Be Physically at Risk. And this is just something that I was thinking about one day, so I wanted to document it. It's not very interconnected yet, but it's an idea I had that might be useful later within the contexts of risk, circus, and theater. So it's there when I need it, if I need it. And I'll let you pause the video if you are particularly interested in this random thought that I had one day. To summarize, if you are trying to learn new information deeply so that you'll remember it and you're able to access it again, or if you're trying to do research and discover new knowledge, then I highly recommend you try out a note-taking system in which the notes are 1, atomic, 2, interconnected, and 3, written in your own words. I use the Zettelkasten system in Obsidian, and both of those things allow for bi-directional linking, those backlinks and links with every note. And I also have a ton of videos and Medium articles about both of those things you can check out. If you're looking for things to take notes about, then you can try Skillshare using the link in my description box for 30 days free trial and get your first 40% off your first year of Skillshare membership, and that is possible using the link below. They have a ton of classes, so if you're not sure whether they have the thing that you're looking to learn, then just get that 30-day free trial and check it out. See what they do have and if it's worth it for you. That's all I have for you today. I hope you thought of some ways that you can make your notes more effective for your purposes, and I will see you in another video soon. Bye, everybody!